Before you swipe away, imagine a tiny $1 sitting in your pocket, worth more than a brand new car, more than your savings, more than most people make in a year. This video could completely change how you look at dimes forever, because some dimes were never meant to survive, and the ones that did became legends. Today, I'm revealing the top 5 most valuable $1 coins ever found, rare mintages, historic mistakes, shocking auction prices, and coins so scarce that collectors will fight to own them. And yes, some of these dimes are still out there right now. Imagine holding a tiny silver dime in your hand and realizing that it once traveled through the most powerful decade in modern American history. The year is 1960. The Cold War is at its peak. America is standing on the edge of a new era, and this $1 silently carries the weight of politics, industry, culture, and everyday life. This is not just pocket change. This is a witness, a survivor, and a storyteller. The 1960 Roosevelt dime was born in a nation full of tension and hope, minted from real silver at a time when money still had intrinsic value. This coin passed through gas stations, diners, jukeboxes, movie theaters, and payphones. It sat in the pockets of factory workers, soldiers, students, and parents. It moved through hands that built highways, fought wars, dreamed of the future, and feared the unknown. And while presidents spoke on television and rockets prepared to reach space, this dime kept moving quietly, doing its job without recognition. The 1960 dime belongs to the Roosevelt series, introduced in 1946, shortly after the death of President Franklin D. Roosevelt, a leader who guided America through the Great Depression and World War II. The nation chose to honor him on the dime because of his deep connection to the March of Dimes campaign, which fought polio and helped millions of children. The design by engraver John R. Cynic shows Roosevelt facing left, strong, calm, and determined, the same expression Americans remembered from fireside chats and wartime speeches. The reverse displays a torch symbolizing liberty, flanked by an olive branch for peace and an oak branch for strength. A powerful message during a decade defined by nuclear threats and global rivalry. In 1960, the United States Mint struck these dimes in massive numbers at 3 locations: Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco. Philadelphia produced hundreds of millions of coins. Denver followed closely, and San Francisco created proof versions meant for collectors. These dimes were composed of 90% silver and 10% copper, a composition that would soon disappear forever. Just 5 years later, rising silver prices would force the government to remove silver from circulating dimes, but in 1960, Americans still carried real precious metal in their pockets, often without thinking about it. This dime circulated during a turning point in American history: the election of John F. Kennedy, the rise of television culture, the birth of the modern civil rights movement, and the space race against the Soviet Union. Every major event of the era happened while this dime was in circulation. It paid for newspapers that reported on protests and political debates. It dropped into vending machines during late-night factory shifts. It rang in cash registers while families planned for a future filled with promise and fear. The coin itself remained unchanged, steady, reliable, and unremarkable on the surface, yet priceless as a historical artifact. Today, collectors now look back at the 1960 dime not just for its silver value, but for its place in history. High-grade examples, especially those with full torch details, are prized. Proof versions from San Francisco are admired for their mirror-like surfaces and sharp strikes. Errors, varieties, and well-preserved specimens continue to excite numismatists decades later, yet even worn examples tell a story. Every scratch, every faded edge speaks of movement, travel, and human connection. What makes the 1960 dime truly powerful is not rarity but relevance. It represents the final years of an old monetary system and the final moment before America changed forever. It is a coin from a time when trust in institutions was strong, when money was tangible, and when the future felt close enough to touch. This dime survived wars, inflation, economic shifts, and technological revolutions. It outlived the silver era, it outlived payphones and jukeboxes, and now it waits quietly in collections' drawers and jars, still holding the Same design, the same silver, and the same silent story. Yes, the 1960 dime continued its journey through American life. It moved through a world that was changing faster than ever before factories roared day and night, producing cars, appliances, and weapons. Suburbs expanded, highways stretched across the nation, and televisions became the new center of the American home. This dime paid for coffee at roadside diners where truck drivers talked about politics and gas prices. It sat in tip jars at barber shops and diners. It was handed to children for candy and comics and dropped into church collection plates. Every movement added another invisible chapter to its story behind the scenes. The United States Mint was operating at full speed, responding to explosive population growth and rising demand for coinage. The Philadelphia Mint produced the 1960 dime without a mint mark, while the Denver Mint added a small D to mark its origin. These tiny details now matter deeply to collectors, but at the time no one paid attention. The coin was meant to be spent, not saved. Yet ironically, the very ordinariness of the 1960 dime is what makes it extraordinary today. It represents the last generation that truly used silver money without realizing it. The craftsmanship of the coin reflects a balance between art and function. Roosevelt's portrait was designed to withstand heavy circulation, strong lines, deep relief, and a dignified profile that could survive decades of use. The torch on the reverse stands tall, symbolizing freedom during a time when freedom was fiercely defended around the world. The olive branch reminds us of the constant hope for peace, while the oak branch represents the strength of the American people. These symbols were not random. They were carefully chosen to speak to a nation living under the shadow of global conflict. In 1960, the average American did not collect coins. They used them, they trusted, and they depended on them. Wages were paid in cash, purchases were counted by hand, and every coin mattered. Vending machines, toll booths, and parking meters relied on exact change. The 1960 dime was essential to daily life, and because of that, it traveled endlessly from state to state, town to town, and hand to hand. Few coins alive today have seen as much real-world action as this one. As the years passed, dramatic changes arrived quickly. The assassination of President Kennedy shocked the nation, civil rights laws reshaped society, and by 1965, silver was removed from dimes forever. Suddenly, the 1960 dime became something new overnight. It was no longer just money, it was a relic. People began pulling silver coins from circulation, saving them in drawers, jars, and boxes, unintentionally preserving history. Some were melted, some were lost, but many survived quietly, waiting for a new generation to rediscover them. Today, when collectors examine a 1960 dime, they look closely at strike, quality, luster, and detail. Full torch examples command respect because they show complete horizontal and vertical bands. Proof coins from San Francisco stand apart with their sharp mirrors and frosted designs. Even circulated pieces have value because of their silver content and historical weight. This coin connects modern collectors to a time when money was heavy, solid, and real. But beyond value, grades, and rarity, the true power of the 1960 dime lies in its story. It is a physical connection to grandparents, parents, and a nation finding its identity. In a rapidly changing world, it is proof that history is not only written in books or recorded on film. Sometimes history lives quietly in your hand, disguised as something small, ordinary, and overlooked. This dime does not shout, it whispers, and if you listen closely, it tells you about an America that believed in progress, feared the future, and carried silver in its pockets without a second thought. That is why the 1960 Roosevelt dime deserves a long look, a long conversation, and a long memory, because within this single small coin lives the echo of an entire era still waiting to be heard. Imagine holding a small, ordinary-looking dime dated 1966 and realizing that this tiny piece of metal was born in one of the most intense turning points in American history, a time when the United States was changing its money, its culture, its economy, and its future all at once. And that simple 1966 dime in your hand is not just 10 cents, it is a silent witness to fear, hope, innovation, and survival. because 1966 sits right in the heart of the Great Coinage Crisis, a moment when Americans hoarding silver, when vending machines were rejecting coins, when the government was racing against time to redesign money before the entire system collapsed. And this single dime tells that whole dramatic story from the moment it left the mint to every pocket it passed through on its long journey across America. The 1966 Roosevelt dime was struck only 1 year after silver was completely removed from dimes, ending nearly the centuries of precious metal coinage in everyday American life. And for collectors and historians, this makes 1966 a powerful symbol of transition, because before this date dimes were real silver, and after this date money would never feel the same again. This dime was produced during a special period when no mint marks were used at all, not because the mints forgot, but because the US government feared that collectors were driving coins out of circulation and creating shortages, so every 1966 dime looks the same whether it came from Philadelphia or elsewhere, making it a fascinating mystery coin that hides its true origin. The design itself carries deep meaning, with President Franklin D. Roosevelt on the front, a man who guided America through the Great Depression and World War II, chosen for the dime because of his connection to the March of Dimes campaign, which fought polio and changed public health forever. And when you look at his portrait on the 1966 dime, you are looking at a tribute to resilience, leadership, and recovery. The reverse shows the torch of liberty flanked by olive and oak branches, symbolizing peace and strength, reminding Americans during the tense Cold War era that freedom must be defended, but also balanced with unity and calm. In 1966, the Vietnam War was escalating. Civil rights protests were filling the streets, space exploration was pushing toward the moon, and inflation fears were reshaping how people trusted money, and this dime moved through all of it quietly, buying coffee, newspapers, bus rides, and dreams. While the nation argued about its future, the metal itself tells another story. Made of copper and nickel layered together instead of silver, it was lighter, cheaper, and designed for speed and mass production because the government needed billions of coins fast to replace the silver ones disappearing into drawers and safes. And this change shocked the public because for the first time, money felt different, sounded different, and no longer carried intrinsic value, which forever changed how Americans thought about wealth. Even today, the 1966 dime sparks curiosity, because while it is common in circulation, high-grade examples with sharp details and full torch lines can be surprisingly valuable, especially to collectors who understand how difficult it was to strike perfect coins during this rushed, chaotic era, and errors like off-center strikes, double dies, and clipped plankets from 1966 are hunted passionately because they capture the stress and urgency of the mint during the crisis. This dime is also a reminder that history does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it hides in plain sight in your pocket, waiting for someone to ask why it exists and what moment created it. And the 1966 dime answers that question with a story of transformation, fear, adaptation, and endurance, making it far more than spare change. It is a time capsule from a year when America decided what its money would become, and in doing so reshaped everyday life forever. The story of the 1966 dime goes even deeper because this coin was born during a time when Americans were questioning the very idea of value and trust in government money. And to understand this dime, you have to step back into the mid-1960s, when people lined up at banks searching through rolls of coins hoping to find silver, and when ordinary citizens became treasure hunters overnight, pulling dimes, quarters, and half dollars out of circulation and locking them away because silver prices were rising and faith in paper promises was falling, and the US Mint was under pressure like never before to keep the nation supplied with coins that people would actually spend. In response, the government made a bold decision to remove silver entirely and flood the economy with clad coinage, and the 1966 dime represents the moment when that experiment was still being tested every single day, as millions of these coins entered circulation and Americans tapped them on counters, listened to their dull sound and realized the age of precious metal pocket change was truly over. The absence of mint marks on the 1966 dime adds another layer of intrigue because this was done intentionally to confuse hoarders and slow down speculation, and it shows just how far the government was willing to go to protect the flow of commerce, even altering long-standing traditions at the mint, and this makes every 1966 dime a product of policy panic and economic strategy rather than simple routine production. The production numbers were massive, yet quality control suffered because speed mattered more than perfection, which is why collectors today carefully examine the torch bands on the reverse, looking for fully struck examples that survive the chaos. And finding one in pristine condition feels like discovering order in the middle of disorder. Beyond the mint, the 1966 dime traveled through a society undergoing cultural revolution. It passed through the hands of factory workers, soldiers, students, and shopkeepers. It jingled in pockets during anti-war marches, paid for gas during the rise of muscle cars, and sat in jukeboxes playing the soundtrack of a generation, and every scratch, nick, and worn edge is a record of movement and use-making. Circulated examples, living artifacts rather than damaged objects. The Roosevelt portrait itself took on new meaning during this era as Americans debated government power, social programs, and individual freedom, and seeing Roosevelt on everyday money reminded people of a leader who expanded federal authority during crisis, and now once again the nation was relying on government action to stabilize the economy through radical change. Even the simple act of spending a dime in 1966 carried psychological weight because people were still adjusting to coins that no longer felt valuable by weight alone, and this shift trained generations to accept money based on trust rather than metal content, a lesson that echoes today in digital payments and virtual currency discussions. Collectors value the 1966 dime not only for rarity or condition, but for the story it tells as a bridge between old and new money, between silver certainty and modern fiat systems. And errors from this year capture moments when machines misfired under pressure, freezing mistakes into metal that would later become prized evidence of history under stress. As time passes, the 1966 dime continues to age into significance because fewer high-grade pieces remain and fewer people remember the fear of empty cash registers and coin shortages, and that makes this dime a powerful educational tool, a physical reminder of how quickly economic systems can change, and how everyday objects carry the weight of national decisions. And when you hold a 1966 dime today, you are not just holding 10 cents, you are holding a lesson about adaptation, trust, and survival during one of the most dramatic monetary transitions in American history. Imagine holding a single ordinary-looking 1975 one dime in your hand and realizing that this tiny piece of metal was born in the middle of one of the most dramatic decades in American history. A decade filled with economic fear, rising inflation, cultural change, political mistrust, and a nation trying to redefine itself after war scandal and social upheaval. This is not just a 10-cent coin, this is a silent witness to the year 1975, a year when the United States was still catching its breath after the Vietnam War had ended, when families gathered around televisions watching a country heal and argue and grow at the same time, and right in the pockets of millions of Americans traveled the Roosevelt dime, struck in massive numbers, yet carrying stories far heavier than its weight, because every 1975 dime connects to a moment when gas prices were high, paychecks felt smaller, lines at gas stations were still fresh memories, and the value of money itself felt uncertain. This dime represents trust in currency during a time when silver had already disappeared from American coins, reminding the public that money was changing forever. The 1975 dime was made of copper and nickel, a clear sign of a new era when intrinsic metal value gave way to faith in government promise and industrial strength. And behind the face of Franklin D. Roosevelt, a president forever linked to crisis and recovery, the coin carried a message of resilience, unity, and endurance. That message mattered deeply in 1975 as Americans reflected on 30 years since the end of World War II and just 1 year before the bicentennial celebration of the nation. The design itself simple, familiar, and strong shows Roosevelt looking forward, a deliberate choice symbolizing leadership through hardship, while the torch, olive branch, and oak branch on the reverse speak of liberty, peace, and strength, values that felt urgently needed. During the mid-70s, every 1975 dime passed through countless hands, buying coffee, newspapers, bus rides, and groceries, becoming part of everyday survival and progress for working families, students, veterans, and dreamers. It jingled in pockets during factory shifts, college lectures, and long commutes. It sat in cash registers during a time when prices were climbing and every cent mattered more than ever. This dime was struck at the Philadelphia and Denver mints in enormous quantities. Yet despite its common appearance, it carries layers of history, economics, and culture, because 1975 was not just another year, it was a turning point. The Watergate scandal was still fresh, trust in leadership was fragile, and Americans were redefining what freedom and responsibility meant in a modern world. And this small coin moved quietly through it all, unchanged, dependable, and essential. The Roosevelt dime in 1975 also reflects the evolution of American minting technology with improved strikes, high-speed production, and the challenge of meeting national demand during inflationary pressure, making each coin a product of efficiency, urgency, and precision. Collectors today look back at the 1975 dime not only for errors, varieties, and mint marks, but for the story it tells about survival, adaptation, and continuity. Because coins are time machines, and this dime takes us straight into a year where optimism and anxiety lived side by side, where the nation prepared to celebrate 200 years of independence, while questioning its future. And when you truly understand the 1975 dime, you realize you are not just looking at spare change, you are holding a chapter of American history, a symbol of trust during uncertainty, a witness to economic transformation, and a reminder that even the smallest denomination can carry the weight of an entire era. And once you see this dime through that lens, you will never look at 10 cents the same way again. 1975 1 dime. We move deeper into the heart of the mid-1970s, where this small coin becomes a daily companion to a nation in transition. In 1975, the American economy was still wrestling with inflation. Wages were rising, but not fast enough, and every trip to the store reminded people that money did not stretch the way it once had. And the dime played a critical role, because 10 cents could still buy something meaningful: phone call from a payphone, a newspaper, a piece of candy, or part of a bus fare. And that made the dime feel important, dependable, and personal. The Roosevelt dime had already been in circulation for nearly 3 decades by 1975, and its familiar design brought a sense of stability in a time when stability felt rare. People trusted this coin because it had not changed even as the world around them did. The absence of silver in the 1975 dime told a quiet story about global markets, rising metal prices, and the hard decisions made by the United States Mint to protect the economy from coin hoarding and shortages. This copper-nickel composition was not glamorous, but it was practical, durable, and designed for everyday use, which perfectly matched the spirit of the working-class families who relied on it every day at the Philadelphia Mint and the Denver Mint. Millions upon millions of 1975 dimes were struck at incredible speed, machines running constantly to keep up with demand. As older coins disappeared into collections or were pulled from circulation, the mint workers understood that these coins were not souvenirs, they were tools of commerce, and each strike had to be precise, balanced, and strong. Collectors today sometimes forget that behind every coin there were people, engineers, inspectors, and laborers ensuring that every dime met strict standards even under pressure. The 1975 dime also lived through a fascinating cultural moment. It passed hands during the rise of disco music, the popularity of vinyl records, and the dominance of radio. It jingled in pockets outside movie theaters showing blockbuster films, and in diners serving affordable meals to families trying to stay within budget. It was present in laundromats, arcades, and corner stores, places that defined everyday American life. And while the coin itself remained silent, it absorbed the fingerprints of a generation navigating change and uncertainty. The Roosevelt portrait on the obverse takes on deeper meaning. When viewed through the lens of 1975, Roosevelt was a leader associated with the Great Depression and World War II, and his image on the dime served as a reminder that the nation had survived worse times and could endure again. That symbolism mattered as Americans reflected on recent struggles, including war protests, political scandals, and economic shocks. The reverse design, with the torch, olive branch, and oak branch, reinforced ideas of liberty, peace, and strength, values that felt both challenged and necessary during this period. The 1975 dime also stands at the edge of the bicentennial era, with excitement building across the country, preparations underway for celebrations and commemorations that would honor 200 years of independence, and this dime circulated alongside that growing sense of reflection and national identity. It represents the calm before a symbolic storm, a year of preparation, remembrance, and cautious hope. Collectors who study the 1975 dime today look for mint-state examples, clean strikes, full bands on the torch, and sharp details that reveal the quality of minting during a high-pressure production year. Error coins such as off-center strikes, double dies, and clipped plankets capture attention because they show moments when the system faltered briefly, creating rare survivors from a sea of uniformity. But even without rarity, the true value of the 1975 dime lies in its story. It is a coin that reminds us that history is not always made by grand monuments or rare treasures. Sometimes it is carried quietly in a pocket, exchanged without thought, yet deeply connected to the lives of millions. And as we continue to explore the 1975 dime, we uncover layer after layer of meaning, economics, culture, design, and human experience, all compressed into 10 cents, proving that even the smallest coin can tell an endless story if you know how to listen. Picture this: you are holding a small silver-colored coin barely larger than your thumbnail, yet inside this one dime, dated 1977, lives an entire story of America: power struggle, economy, fear, hope, technology, politics, and everyday life. This is not just loose change. This is a witness to a nation standing between the scars of the past and the uncertainty of the future. The year 1977 was not quiet, it was not simple, and it was not ordinary. And this dime traveled through pockets, factories, gas stations, grocery stores, and payphones, while the world around it changed fast and often violently. This is the story of the 1977 one dime, a coin most people ignore, and yet one that quietly watched history happen. When this dime was struck, the United States was still recovering from a decade of shock. Inflation was high, trust in government was low, and Americans were learning to live without silver in their pocket change. For the first time in generations, the Roosevelt dime had lost its precious metal more than a decade earlier, but by 1977 people were finally realizing what that meant. Coins no longer felt valuable by weight, only by promise, and this dime represents the turning point. The moment money fully became an idea rather than a substance. The face of Franklin Delano Roosevelt looks calm, confident, almost reassuring. But in 1977, the country needed reassurance more than ever. A new president, Jimmy Carter, had just taken office, promising honesty after years of scandal and resignation. Factories were slowing, unemployment was real, and families were counting every cent. This dime passed through hands that worried about gas prices, mortgages, and the future of their children. And yet it kept moving silently, unchanged, doing its job without complaint. This dime was born in massive numbers, struck in Philadelphia and Denver by powerful presses running day and night. The United States Mint was focused on efficiency, speed, and volume, not beauty, not rarity, just survival of a cash-hungry economy. Every strike of the press echoed the pressure of the time, the need for commerce, the demand for circulation, the urgency of movement. And yet within those millions of identical coins, tiny differences were created, errors, variations Weak strikes off center details that today collectors hunt obsessively because they prove that even mass production cannot erase individuality. Look at the torch on the reverse, flanked by olive and oak branches, a symbol of liberty, peace, and strength. In 1977, those symbols were being tested overseas, and at home the Cold War was still alive, energy shortages haunted the nation, and confidence was fragile. This dime does not shout these struggles, but it carries them quietly like a photograph, hidden in a wallet, never meant to be displayed, but never forgotten. This is also the era when coin collecting began to change. The casual silver stacker was replaced by the modern roll hunter, and variety specialist people started saving coins like this dime, not for metal value, but for condition, mint marks, and errors. The 1977 dime became a training ground for a new generation of collectors learning to see beyond face value, learning that history can be found in scratches, luster, and strike quality. Imagine how many stories this dime touched. It may have bought a newspaper reporting global tension, or dropped into a jukebox playing disco music that defined the decade. It may have paid for a cup of coffee during a long night shift, or rattled in a child's pocket on the way to school. This coin lived a real life and survived while countless others were lost, melted, or forgotten. Today, when you find a 1977 dime, it feels ordinary, cold, light, and common, but that is the illusion. Ordinary objects often carry the deepest history. This dime is a survivor of a difficult decade, a symbol of adaptation and endurance. It marks the moment America fully stepped into modern money and left precious metal behind forever. In this video, we are going to uncover everything about the 1977 one dime, its history, its minting process, its varieties, its errors, its value today, and the hidden reasons why collectors are starting to look at it differently. By the end, you will never look at a dime the same way again, because once you understand the story behind this small coin, you realize it was never small at all. As we go deeper into the 1977 one dime story, we have to slow down and truly understand what daily life looked like when this coin was new. America was adjusting to a new rhythm. Lines at gas stations were still a recent memory. Prices kept climbing, and every dime mattered. This was not spare change, it was purchasing power. And when someone handed over this dime, they felt it. This coin moved through an economy that was learning hard lessons about limits, trust, and responsibility. Production of the 1977 dime tells its own story. The Philadelphia Mint struck coins without a mint mark, while Denver added its small a tiny letter that now separates common finds from condition rarities. Millions were made, but few survived in perfect shape. The presses were worn, speed was prioritized, and quality control was secondary. Weak strikes, soft details, and surface marks became normal, and that is why high-grade examples today command attention, because they represent perfection born from chaos. Collectors now examine the hairlines on Roosevelt's portrait, the sharpness of the torch flames, and the clarity of the bands on the reverse. Those full band details are not just technical features, they are proof that a coin was struck with care at a moment when care was hard to find. Every full band 1977 dime is a silent victory over rushed production. Errors from this year tell even louder stories. Off-center strikes, clipped plankets, double dies, and grease-filled dies, each one a mistake frozen in time. These errors escaped inspection and entered circulation, where they lived normal lives until someone, decades later, finally noticed them and asked what went wrong at the mint. These coins are evidence that even government systems are human and imperfect. The late 70s vending machines, parking meters, and payphones depended on coins like this dime. The sound of it dropping into metal slots became part of everyday American life. The sharp ring of copper nickel against steel echoed through streets, offices, and diners. This dime was heard before it was seen, and trusted before it was questioned. As the years passed and inflation continued, the dime slowly lost its buying power. What once bought candy or a phone call became symbolic rather than practical. And that change is critical to understanding why coins like the 1977 dime were spent so freely and save so rarely nobody imagined they would matter someday. And that is exactly why they dono fast forward to today. Collectors pull rolls from banks, hoping to spot one clean touch survivor from 1977. They look for original luster, sharp rims, and unbroken details, because finding one feels like rescuing a piece of history from obscurity. Grading services examine these coins under magnification, measuring quality with precision that did not exist when the coin was added value of a 1977 dime is not just measured in dollars, it is measured in context, condition, and connection. It connects us to a decade of transition when America learned to adapt and move forward without the comfort of precious metal money. This dime marks the maturity of modern coinage and the resilience of a nation. Every scratch on a circulated example tells a story, every pristine example tells another, and together they form a timeline of use, neglect, survival, and rediscovery. This is why the 1977 one dime matters, not because it is rare, but because it is real. Imagine holding a small silver coin that almost everyone has touched, yet almost no one has truly understood. The one dime from 1980, a coin that passed quietly through millions of hands. While America stood at the edge of enormous change, this dime was born in a year when the Cold War still shaped daily fear, when inflation haunted every paycheck, when gas lines were a recent memory, and when the United States was struggling to redefine its power, its confidence, and its future. This is not just a 10-cent piece. This is a time capsule struck in metal, carrying the weight of politics, economics, culture, and human habit. The Roosevelt dime, design already familiar by 1980, had become a symbol of stability and endurance. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the face of the dime, represented leadership through crisis, and by 1980 his image reminded Americans of survival through hardship. At a moment when the nation again felt uncertain, the coin was made primarily of copper with a nickel outer layer, the decision that itself tells a powerful story, because only a few years earlier dimes were made of silver, and the removal of precious metal reflected rising costs, government decisions, and a changing relationship between money and value. The 1980 dime was produced in massive numbers at the Philadelphia and Denver mints, making it one of the most common coins in circulation, yet its very abundance makes it invisible, and that invisibility is what makes its story so powerful, because common objects shape history more than rare ones. This dime paid for newspapers that reported global tensions. It helped buy coffee during long workdays. It sat in pockets during political debates about leadership, inflation, and national direction. The year 1980 was marked by a presidential election that would reshape American policy, the Iran hostage crisis that tested patience and pride, and an economy fighting high inflation and unemployment. Every dime minted that year moved through this environment, silently witnessing the daily life of a nation in transition. Vending machines, payphones, parking meters, and corner stores all depended on coins like this one, and the dime became a symbol of routine normalcy in a world that felt unstable. Even the wear patterns on surviving 1980 dimes tell stories of repetition, friction, and time. Smooth edges, faded details, and softened faces reflect countless exchanges between strangers, each coin passing briefly from one life to another without recognition, yet carrying shared experience. Collectors often overlook the 1980 dime because it lacks rarity, but serious numismatists understand that history is not only about scarcity, it is about context, and this coin captures the shift from silver-era romance to modern-clad practicality. It represents the industrial efficiency of the United States Mint, mass production, precision, and durability designed for circulation, not admiration. Errors and mint variations exist within the 1980 dime, adding intrigue for those who look closely. Off-center strikes, weak details, and die variations reveal the human and mechanical imperfections behind industrial processes. And these imperfections turn ordinary coins into storytellers. The Roosevelt dime itself connects to the March of Dimes, a campaign that fought polio and transformed public health, showing how a small coin can symbolize collective action and national Responsibility by 1980 polio had been largely defeated in America, and the dime stood as a quiet reminder of what cooperation and leadership could achieve. When you look at a 1980 dime today, you are not just seeing 10 cents. You are seeing a nation balancing tradition and change, power and vulnerability, abundance and anxiety. This coin is proof that history does not only live in textbooks, museums, or monuments. It lives in pockets, drawers, and jars waiting to be noticed. And once you understand that the smallest coin can carry the biggest story, you will never look at money the same way again. Go deeper into the life of the 1980 dime. By understanding how it moved through American hands during one of the most psychologically tense decades in modern history, this was the moment when cash still ruled daily life, when digital payments did not exist, and when coins were essential for transportation, communication, and survival. A single dime could make a phone call that changed a life. It could add time to a parking meter that prevented a ticket. It could help a child buy candy after school or allow a worker to afford a bus ride home. The 1980 dime was not a luxury object. It was a working object built for constant use and endurance. The United States Mint designed it to survive millions of impacts, drops, scratches, and transfers, and that durability reflects the American ideal of resilience during economic stress. Inflation in 1980 was painful. Prices were rising faster than wages, and every dime mattered more than people wanted to admit. This coin circulated during moments of frustration, hope, routine, and repetition, and every scratch on its surface marks a moment of human decision. The choice to spend, to save, to move, to act. The Denver and Philadelphia mint marks tell a story of industrial-scale production, with millions of dimes flowing out daily, like a river of metal supporting commerce across all 50 states. While the design remained unchanged, the meaning evolved as generations used it without thinking, yet depended on it completely. The torch, olive branch, and oak leaves on the reverse symbolized liberty, peace, and strength, values Americans clung to while facing uncertainty abroad and division at home. The 1980 dime crossed racial, economic, and political boundaries, moving freely between rich and poor, urban and rural, conservative and progressive hands, without judgment, without memory, yet carrying the imprint of all of them. This coin lived through Reagan's rise, the end of one political era, and the beginning of another, through changing attitudes toward government power, military strength, and personal responsibility. And still it remained the same weight, the same size, the same promise of value. Collectors today who overlook this dime miss the larger truth that history is shaped by the ordinary, not the exceptional. Most people did not hold rare coins, they held this dime, and millions still do, forgotten in jars, couches, and drawers. Yet every one of them is a survivor of circulation, a witness to daily life, a fragment of a year that changed direction. When you hold a 1980 dime, you hold the sound of coins clinking in pockets, the smell of gasoline at service stations, the hum of fluorescent lights in grocery stores, the tension of nightly news reports, and the quiet persistence of people moving forward one transaction at a time. This is why the 1980 dime matters, because it proves that even the smallest unit of money can carry the full weight of a nation's story. And once you see that, you realize this dime is not small at all. It is history compressed into metal, waiting for someone to finally tell its story.